بإمكانك تبدأ.
يلا بسم الله.
Okay. Bismillah. This is Amr Al-Azim, President of ARTA. We are very glad and proud to have you here today to meet and listen to our guest speaker, Professor Viezzi. I'm sure we will have an exceptional lecture by an exceptional lecturer and exceptional audience. It's exciting and inspiring to see colleagues and partners in humanity from different parts of the world. You are all welcome. Let me now ask Ms. Noura Barzak to introduce and welcome Professor Viezzi. Noura.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amir. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all in this fabulous lecture and unique day, 12/12/2020. I am Noura Barzak. I will be your MC for this session. I am so excited to be here and to have the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Prof. Maurizio Viezzi. Before I start, let me mention that this lecture is now streamed live on our Facebook page. Maurizio Viezzi is a professor of simultaneous and consecutive interpreting from English into Italian at the University of Trieste, Italy, and adjunct professor at Italian Translation and Interpreting at the University of Turku, Finland. He has published extensively on different aspects of translation and interpreting and lectured in several European and non-European universities. His main research interests are interpretation equality, public service interpreting, and the translation of book and film titles. He was vice president of CIUTI from 2006 to 2012 and has been president of CIUTI since 2015. He is a member of the International Scientific Council of the People's Friendship University of Russia, Moscow. In 2017, he was awarded an honorary doctorate in translatology by Moscow State Linguist University. And now, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I feel very proud to present to you Prof. Maurizio Viezzi, so please join me in welcoming him. And may I ask Prof. Viezzi to present his lecture? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. It is very difficult these days to know where people are. And you don't know whether it is morning, evening, night, or whatever. Anyway, good evening. Hello, everybody. I'm really very pleased to be with you. Unfortunately, online, not on site, but you know, this is live in this dreadful year 2020. I would like to thank the Arab Translators Association for the invitation and its president, of course, Amr Al-Azim. It is really, really a great pleasure to be here. As I can see that the number of participants is very high, and well, I'm really, really very pleased with this. Now, what I would like to do, let me see if I can move this thing. No. Yes. What I would like to do today is to share some reflections on language, languages, multilingualism, and the starting point of this lecture is that language, languages, and multilingualism are a challenge to be met by all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean all of us in our different capacities, as academics, as professionals, as representatives of associations, organizations, everyone. And how can this challenge be met by us, by all of us? Well, by raising awareness of language and language-related issues, by promoting appropriate language policies in different areas, and by paving the way for a real culture of multilingualism. And I will be covering this area in my presentation today. But this is the outline of the talk. First of all, I will deal with societal multilingualism. Then I will move to language and languages in general and to the English language in particular, also in the context of English as a lingua franca. And I will end with some remarks on translation and interpreting, and I hope then to have the time to have a question and answers session at the end of the presentation. Now, let me start with multilingualism. Multilingualism is a word that may have different meanings, or rather, it is used in different contexts with different meanings. Multilingualism may apply or may refer to people. This is what we call individual multilingualism. It applies to people that are able to communicate in more than one language. And I would say that all of us here today are multilingual. Then we may have institutional multilingualism, which applies to institutions that operate, that function with more than one official language. Take the United Nations, for example, with its 6 official languages. And of course, the most striking example in this respect is the European Union, with 24 official languages for 27 member institutions. Then we have what I would call multilingualism of communication, which applies to content, the same content being conveyed and disseminated in different languages, of course, thanks to translation and interpreting. Finally, we have societal multilingualism, multilingualism in society, and this is an area I would like to dwell on for a few minutes. Now, the Earth is multilingual, as we all know. There are some 7,000 languages spoken in the world, some of which are spoken by enormous numbers of people. Think of Chinese, for example, or English. Others are spoken by just a few dozen speakers, but the total number is more or less 7,000. Now, what happens in certain parts of the world? I'm thinking in particular of Europe now and Western Europe. Countries and cities are increasingly multilingual and multicultural as a result of migration, as a result of mobility. Multilingualism is now characterizing cities and countries, most of which are now characterized by a situation that has been defined super diversity. Just to give you an example, according to the Metropolitan Police in London a few years ago, the number of languages spoken was 340. Just think about that, 340 languages spoken in just one city. Okay, London, big city, perhaps the world record holder in this respect, perhaps an exception, but all large cities in Western Europe have at least 100, 150 different languages spoken. Now, this would require, of course, appropriate policies, appropriate attitudes, to deal with this kind of super diversity. But let me concentrate on languages now. When I say 300 languages, when I say 100 languages, well, these are not statistics, of course, because languages are spoken by people. And in multilingual countries and cities, many people, migrants, mobile people, people who have just arrived in those countries and cities, many of them don't know their local language, that they don't know it well enough, then they don't know it yet. But they have to communicate. they have to access public services. They have to communicate with authorities, they have to communicate with service providers. And if you think of asylum seekers, which is a phenomenon quite considerable in Europe in these years, asylum seekers need language assistance from the very first moment they set foot in a different country, just to verify their if they are entitled to asylum, etc. So these people don't know the language, but these people need to communicate. And effective communication is only possible if language services are provided. Effective communication is only possible if translation and in particular interpreting are provided. What is the problem in most countries? That language services are often unavailable or inadequate. I'm thinking of Europe now, I'm thinking of Western Europe, but this may be a problem everywhere. Of course, in Europe it is stronger because the number of people needing language services is higher, but probably this situation is going to spread to other parts of the world as well. So, as I said, many people have big problems in terms of communication. Many people need or would need language services, language assistance, but language services are often unavailable or inadequate. And the consequences may be very, very serious. I mean, if there are no appropriate services, just think in particular of sensitive settings such as healthcare or justice. If there is no adequate language assistance, think in terms of well, financial costs, but this is not a big problem. Things in terms of personal health, in terms of personal freedom. Clearly, this is a big problem. Furthermore, if access to services is difficult or is impossible because of a language barrier, what we have is discrimination on the grounds of language, which is something that is prohibited by most international legal instruments and in particular by all United Nations legal instruments. It is, in other words, a big problem. Now, I think that translation and interpreting services should be available in all public services, which is not the case now. But how to arrive to such a situation? Well, legislation is needed, but in order to have legislation, of course, you have to have a political will to arrive at legislation. In Europe, for some years, we've had now a directive, a European Union directive, Directive 2010/64, which is about translation and interpreting in criminal proceedings, so in the area of justice. And that particular directive has been now incorporated in all member states' legislations, and apparently it is working. In all criminal proceedings, if necessary, there is interpreting, and interpreting costs are covered by the state. This is very important. But of course, something like that should be extended to other areas as well. And I'm thinking in particular of healthcare, where the presence of interpreters could be absolutely crucial. But of course, I said that this directive, thanks to this directive, there is interpreting in all criminal proceedings. I said that there should be language services, that there should be language assistance, but of course the presence of an interpreter is not enough. The fact that there is a language service somewhere is not enough, because what is needed is high quality language services provided by high-quality translators and interpreters. This point is absolutely crucial. Problem is that now you may think I'm generalizing a little bit too much. Perhaps it's true. Of course, there are differences between different countries. In Europe, for example, the situation in Northern Europe is much better than the situation in Southern Europe. But problems do exist everywhere. And what happens in many cases, as I said, in particular in Southern Europe, and in particular for certain languages, is well, I'll tell you in a moment what is the big problem as far as interpreters are concerned. Let's start with the problem concerning service providers. Service providers know very little about translation and interpreting. They are not quality aware. They don't know what quality is. They don't know what quality means. Very often they equate speakers with interpreters. In other words, they say, if you know language X, Y, Z, you can be an interpreter for language X, Y, Z. In many cases, and this is true for court interpreting, they don't give information to interpreters because they want interpreters to be influenced or biased or who knows why. Can you possibly imagine going to court to serve as an interpreter without knowing what the case is about? How can you do a good job if you are not put in the right, if you are not given the opportunity to prepare adequately for that job? So you see, problems start with public service providers and their attitude, etc. But then there is the problem of interpreters themselves, as I said, because in particular in certain countries, but in particular for certain languages, interpreters working in public services are often untrained, are often unqualified, are generally non-professionals. They sometimes have a limited knowledge of the local language, and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say now here is that, yes, of course, it is easy everywhere to have trained, qualified, professional interpreters for languages such as, I don't know, English or French or Spanish. It is much more difficult to have trained, qualified, professional interpreters for languages spoken by a small number of people in, I don't know, Central Asia or Central Africa. And as you may imagine, if 100 or 200 languages are spoken in any given big city, many of those languages are languages which are not taught in schools, are not taught at universities there, etc., etc. So interpreters are necessarily people belonging to that particular community, and very often they are not trained, qualified, etc., etc. So this is a big problem that should be addressed by, first of all, as I said at the beginning already, by first of all raising awareness of the issue, of the problem, of the needs, of the risks of not guaranteeing appropriate language assistance and language services. Now, second point, language and languages. I will, languages, well, of course, languages are communication tools, of course, but they are not just communication tools. Languages also are to do with identity, sense of belonging, power. Languages may be tools of repression. Languages may be weapons, etc., etc. I think we, in particular, those of you or those of us who live in border areas may be familiar with all this. And in a way, languages are not innocent. And what I mean here is that what languages we present sometimes prevail over what languages actually are. I will give you a couple of examples. I live in a border area. Trieste is located in the northeastern part of Italy. Slovenia is just 10 kilometers away from my home. And you know that relations with neighbors are not necessarily very good. And relations with the neighbor's language are not necessarily very good. Now, it so happens that a few years ago, the national education minister in Italy authorized the teaching of Slovene, which for us is the neighbor's language. The minister authorized the teaching of Slovene in upper secondary schools in Trieste, Italy. Well, some political parties immediately reacted to that by saying that the Slovene language is a useless language. Can you imagine? How can a language spoken by millions of people be useless? Obviously, this kind of reaction has nothing to do with language itself, but with the people speaking that particular language. So you see, language is here taken as a sort of terrain where to wage war, where, of course, only, but luckily only with and through words and nothing else. But you see that languages go well beyond the mere communication tool thing that some naively think languages are all about. I will give you another interesting example. I don't know how familiar you are with Belgium. I don't know what you know about Belgium. Belgium is a very nice country, and I like it very much. I go there pretty often. Belgium is basically divided into three parts. Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking part of the country, Wallonia, which is the French-speaking part of the country, and then Brussels, the capital area, where both Dutch and French are spoken. And those languages are official in the respective parts of the country. So Dutch is the official language of Flanders, French is the official language of Wallonia, and both French and Dutch are official languages in Brussels. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with the Belgian railway system. In the Belgian railway system, in stations and on trains, information is provided in the language where the station is located, or in the language of the area where the train is running at any given point in time. Which may mean, in other words, that you may board a train going to Loek, and all of a sudden you are told that the train is going to Liège, which doesn't mean that the train has been hijacked, but it simply means that the train has moved from Flanders to Wallonia. Loek and Liège are the two names of the same place. Loek is the Dutch name, Liège is the French name of the same city. So you see, information changes The language of information changes depending on where the train is located, where the station is located, which doesn't help a foreign traveler, of course. We may know very little about these things and may know very little about the names of the same city in the two languages. My impression is that in this kind of language policy, the main goal is not to provide information, but rather to assert identity, to assert language identity. In other words, I think this confirms what the Canadian sociologist Marshall McLuhan used to say in the 1960s: the medium is the message. In this particular case, the language in which you say something is more important than what you say. I think that the young generation, what we in Europe call the Erasmus generation, you know, students moving around, students spending 6 months or 1 year abroad during their university studies. I think this generation can play an important role in opposing this kind of nationalist and chauvinist rhetoric that surrounds languages. Let's hope. Anyway, I think that in general language education is needed. Language is, of course, a very human function, a very human quality, activity, etc., etc. And it is so normal, so natural that everyone feels entitled to speak about language, but very few people, or relatively few people, know about language. People who are not language professionals generally know very little about language and languages, but they feel entitled to talk about language nevertheless. But this is why I think that language education is needed, would be needed, also to avoid misconceptions and prejudice. Let me give you a couple of examples here again. A couple of years ago, I was in Rome, and I went to a coffee bar to have a cup of coffee in the morning, and I had a look at one of the local newspapers, and I found a letter of a reader who complained about the overwhelming presence of English in Italy in private and public communication. And this man wrote things such as, English is everywhere. I'm really fed up with English. Why should people always talk English? Why they don't speak proper Italian, etc., etc. And then he concluded his letter saying, and then English, such a poor and unrefined language. Would you believe it? English, poor and unrefined. I mean, the language in which some of the great masterpieces of world literature were written, called poor and unrefined. Okay, you see, language education is needed. But that particular reader was not obviously an expert, but interesting things may be found even in an expert's world. Almost 20 years ago, an interesting book was published in Italy, co-written by a physicist and a linguist. Basically, it was a dialogue between the two, a dialogue on the so-called two cultures, humanities and hard sciences. One was a physicist, so hard scientist. The other was a linguist, so humanities. and then discussed about a different thing. It was a sort of dialogue, as I said. And at a certain point, they also talked about language and languages. And the physicist said that there are, obviously, he says, there are languages suited to science and languages unsuited to science. And he said English is typically a language suited to science, whereas Italian, for example, is unsuited to science. The linguist, De Mauro, said, well, perhaps you're right, perhaps you're not. I don't know, but certainly, says the linguist, English is unsuited to expressing nuances of meaning in politically discourse, art, or literary criticism. This is what the linguist said, which is very similar to what the reader said, the reader I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Poor and unrefined. Again, absolutely unbelievable. How can you say that a language such as English is not good for political discourse, art, and literary criticism? But anyway, I think this is a prejudice. The idea that the idea that there is some kind of specialization of languages reminds me of Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He lived in the 16th century, and he used to say, or allegedly, he used to say that he spoke Spanish to God, French to men, Italian to women, and German to his horse. Of course, we don't know if it is true, but you see this idea of specialization, okay? All languages are not equal. All languages, each language should be used for a certain purpose, not for others, etc., etc. I find all this absolutely, well, absolutely, not absolutely, but a little bit absurd. I think that all languages can be used to talk about just anything. Yes, of course, it may be difficult to talk about artificial intelligence using a language that is spoken by 50 people in the middle of Africa. But this is simply because that particular people is isolated, because they don't have contacts with the artificial intelligence world. But otherwise, I can see why any topic shouldn't be addressed by any, or using any language, even Latin, for example. Do you know that in Finland there is a radio program, a radio news program in Latin? You can switch on your radio and listen to the news in Latin on Finnish radio. And if it is too difficult to find it on the radio, you can go to the website and read the news there. What you can see here is, for example, a short report on a meeting between President Putin and President Xi Jinping. They met in Foro Commerciali Petropolitano, which is St. Petersburg, and they talked about this and that, etc., etc., commercial wars, and well, anyway, it's here. This is just an example that just any language could be used to talk about just anything. And the idea that there are languages that are better than others is, to my mind, simply based on prejudice and something that we should well, it is a problem that should be solved. Huh? Let me put it this way. When we say that some languages are better than others, when we talk about the limits of language, well, I don't like that. I think that the limits of a language are very often the limits of a language speaker, exactly as when people talk about the limits of translation, actually they should talk about the limits of a translator. Okay, I think that in principle, all languages, with all languages, a speaker can do just everything. And if he or she can do it, perhaps it is not because of the language, but it is because of the speaker himself or herself. But what the reader, the newspaper reader said is partially true. It is not true that English is a poor and unrefined language, but it is certainly true that there is an overwhelming presence of English in private and public communication in Italy. It is a sort of happily embraced language colonization. There is so many English around in Italian public and private discourse, you know, individual English words used here and there with worrying frequency, I must say, to the point that a couple of years ago, the Italian Language Academy invited the Education Ministry to show greater respect for Italian language and culture. Would you believe it? This was due to the fact that the Education Ministry had issued some kind of document which was in Italian, but with so many English words that it was absolutely astonishing, to the point that the Language Academy said, listen, people, try and be more respectful of your language and your culture. I think that one of the issues here is that the English language, is often seen as a marketing tool, by which what I mean is that there is a feeling that if you use English words, what you say is regarded as better, more modern, more sophisticated, more advanced, etc., etc. I have this particular impression, and even ordinary Italian words describing or used to denote ordinary objects or situations are very often replaced by English words. I mean, we say computer in Italy, in Italian, but this is pretty normal, okay? All of a sudden something arrives and it has an English name, and there's nothing strange and nothing wrong in adopting the English name for something new. But there is no reason to use an English name for concepts or objects, etc., or situations such as place, okay? Or telephone call, or things like that. Absolutely ordinary things for which many people are now using English words rather than Italian words. Again, very strange, but this is what happens in this country. What happens in academia, in universities, is again linked with the English language, is a proliferation of courses in English. Many universities now offer courses in English, and they regard that as a proof of internationalization. Very often those courses in English end up being courses taught in English by Italian teachers to Italian students. So what's the point? And as for internationalization, well, you know, I think that internationalization is something else. It is not just the use of the English language. Look at this definition of Knight. Internationalization is the process of integrating an international or intercultural dimension into the teaching, research, and service functions of the institution. In other words, it is not the language that matters, but it is what you teach that matters. You go international when your content are international and not your language or not just your language. And I would like to make a distinction here between internationalization and globalization. I don't like globalization, but I do like internationalization. Globalization is a sort of homogenization characterized or tendentially characterized by monolingualism and monoculturalism. I like internationalization, where different languages and different cultures coexist and enrich each other. And it is completely different. It is completely different. A globalized world is a world where English is the dominant language. An internationalized world is a world where all languages have their place and have their role. And of course, where translation and interpreting also have a role to play. Sorry, I have to go back. How can I go back here now? Oh no, very difficult. Yes. Which leads me to the concept of lingua franca. As I said, in a globalized world, the globalized world is a world where there is a world lingua franca. Okay, English is the language of civilization. Could you please? Thank you. Now, nothing wrong with the lingua franca, of course, with the concept or the reality of lingua franca. Lingua franca is useful, and there have always been lingua francas. Think of Latin, for example. Latin was a lingua franca for centuries, well after the end of the Roman Empire. Academics, scientists now publish in English. In the past, they published in Latin. I don't know, an English physicist such as Newton, or a Polish astronomer such as Copernicus, or a Swedish natural scientist such as Linnaeus, they all published in Latin. So nothing new there. And by the way, nothing wrong in a lingua franca. And by the way, English is an excellent lingua franca. But well, it is not true that everybody speaks English. Huh? We often hear people say, "Oh yes, very nice. If everybody speaks English, so the problem of communication has been solved." No, it is not true, of course, because it is not true that everybody speaks English. Just go have a walk in the center of your city, so you will immediately realize that it is not true that everybody speaks English. But then there is another problem when a lingua franca associated with a lingua franca. A lingua franca is a foreign language. By definition, a lingua franca is a foreign language for most people. And the competence in the foreign language is not the same as in your own language. As someone said, in your language, you say what you want. In another language, you say what you can. And what is true for expression, for speaking, is also true for reception, for understanding. And so people sometimes talk about lost in translation, but we should start thinking about, or in terms of lost in lingua franca, how much is lost when a lingua franca is used? How much is lost in terms of things that one is not able to say, in terms of things that one is not able to understand? And then, but all this is much more, how can I say, takes, it covers many, many areas, not just the areas of individual meetings or people talking to other people in airports or in hotels, etc. But things of the world of academia, the world of research. How much good research is not published? We know that there is quite a lot of good research that is not published because it is written in poor English or in an English that is assessed as not good enough. And quite a lot of research is not published for that. Quite a lot of research is not, therefore, is not disseminated simply because it is not published, and it is not published because it is written in poor English. And this is an area where translation and interpreting could be enormously helpful. Talking about research, we know that there is quite a lot of very good research written and published in national languages that is, again, not accessible because it's written in languages that many people don't know. Okay, if I read, I may publish extraordinary research in Italian or Portuguese or Bulgarian, or I don't know which, or Swedish, okay? And most people will not be able to have access to that research simply because they don't know the language, okay? This is a problem in terms of dissemination of knowledge. And of course, this is a problem that translation and interpreting could solve. But okay, probably we'll come back to that later if we have some time. There is another problem, you know, in English as a lingua franca, English as the language of academia, English as the language in which you have to publish if you want your research to be known, to be disseminated, etc. English as the language of international working groups, etc., etc. English as the only language of communication in science. Well, all this is a big problem. All this amounts to a big problem for a number of reasons. First of all, as I said before, language is not just a communication tool. Language is also the tool with which knowledge is constructed. Language is the tool with which ideas are produced. If you use only one language, okay, you don't have at your disposal the different perspectives that different languages may entail, may bring about. And then language determines a reality, or at least language determines our perception of reality. Whether we call something in English or French is not exactly the same. There are different ways that English or French words interpret and describe reality, the same reality, okay? So the richness of multilingualism would be absolutely crucial in terms of production and dissemination of knowledge. If we don't have that, if we are monolingual in the production and dissemination of knowledge, well, there's quite a lot that gets lost in terms of creativity, in terms of richness. Okay, not to mention the fact that the use of just one language may lead to what has been called the monoculture of knowledge and science, or even to what the French call la pensée unique, the single thought, a single way of thinking, which is, of course, a problem or a danger. or a threat, right? Okay. I mentioned language education before. Language education is absolutely needed. And when I say language education, I'm not just referring, or in this case, I'm not referring to learning foreign languages. I'm referring to learning or studying one's own language. Language education in terms of learning and learning how to use and learning how to understand and how to express yourself in your own language. A relatively recent study by a working group set up by the European Union showed that 20% of boys and girls aged 15 are functionally illiterate in Europe. Functionally illiterate means that these people, these youngsters, are technically able to write and read, but they don't understand what they read, and they can't write. They can't express in writing what they want to express, and this is not because they have some disease or some psychological or physical problem, whatever. No, this is a matter of language knowledge, an ability to use the language. These are 15-year-olds, but something that perhaps may be interesting for you as translators and interpreters. The European institutions regularly organize what they call inter-institutional tests for interpreters wishing to work as freelance for the European institutions, okay? And they organize these tests regularly. So these tests are open to interpreters, people who already work as interpreters, right? Well, the success rate at those tests is more or less 20%. So 80% fail those tests. And do you know why? In most cases, not because their interpreting technique is not good, not because they lack world knowledge or the topic in question, etc. But in most cases, they fail because the command of their mother tongue is not good enough. They don't have the mother tongue competence, as we used to call it, is not enough. Okay, which is rather impressive, if you ask me. Working professional interpreters who are not good enough in expressing themselves in their own languages. That's why language education is important. What I do for a living, I am a teacher or trainer of interpreters or future interpreters, aspiring interpreters. And when on day 1 or day 2 of my courses, I tell my students that yes, it is important to study this and that, but please don't forget your own language. They are always amazed, surprised, offended. I say, what do you mean? Do you think I don't know? Do you think we don't know our language? Okay, they tend to resent this kind of remark because, of course, they say we are Italians and therefore we know our language. Okay, knowing language may mean different things. Certainly, the kind of the level required in terms of ability of use the language the level required of an interpreter, of a professional interpreter working at the very top, well, is not the same level of proficiency required of someone who simply has to go about his or her life without having to use language at a very advanced or sophisticated level. Okay, but this is another matter. Translation and interpreting. Let me. I'm approaching the end, so some things about translation and interpreting. Some people say that translation and interpreting are caught in the crossfire of English, the lingua franca, and technology. Some people say that translation and interpreting, translators and interpreters are endangered species. Well, I would say my point is that translation and interpreting are more needed than ever. They are needed for communication, because, as I said, it is not true that everybody speaks English. They are true for the quality of communication, because, as I said, competence in a foreign language, in a lingua franca, is not the same as competence in your own language. Translation and interpreting are needed for the enforcement of rights. You remember at the beginning when we were talking about discrimination, access to services, etc., etc. And translation and interpreting are necessary and needed, more needed than ever, to ensure multilingualism, okay, rather than monolingualism, which we don't like, do we? And good news is that the market is expanding for both translation and interpreting, which is, again, good news and very, very important. Now, the elephant in the room now is artificial intelligence, technology. What is going to happen in the future? Are those professions really endangered professions, etc., etc.? You know, the translation not very often, but it is not unusual for texts, even literary texts, to be translated by amateurs who cooperate in a way to produce a translation. It is what is referred to as crowdsourced translation. This was done and is regularly done for subtitling of famous series. It was done for Harry Potter books, etc., etc. So you have a text and you have 10, 20, 50, I don't know, any number of people working and contributing their bit in a kind of cooperative translation. Okay, how much quality is there in translations of this kind? And then, in general, how much quality is there in machine translation and machine interpreting? These are the big issues and the big questions for the future. And as I said before, are translators and interpreters endangered species? The big question. Now, let me ask you a question. Does the world need trains, planes, or rockets? What do you say? My answer is no. The world does not need trains, planes, or rockets. The world needs means of transport. And whether it is horses or horse-drawn carriages or bicycles or cars or trains or planes or what have you, it depends on technology, costs, efficiency, effectiveness, and, crucially, quality. Well, does the world need translators and interpreters? I'm afraid the answer is the same. No, the world does not need translators and interpreters. The world needs translation and interpreting. The world has communication, interlinguistic communication needs someone or something to meet those needs. And whether it is humans or machines, again, it depends on technology, costs, efficiency, effectiveness, and quality. I think we should have this kind of attitude. Translation is and will be absolutely necessary. Translators, interpreters, people taken care of may or may not be there in X number of years, at least in principle, at least in theory. But the main issue here is, as I said, is quality. Machines are good. Machines are proven very good over the past several months, okay, with this COVID thing, etc. Machines are helpful for translators, are helpful for translation, but the big problem is, a very big question is, can they take over? And of course, can they provide the same quality? This is the real point. Now, I will not say anything about translation because I don't know much about the translation, about machine translation, etc. But let me say something about interpreting. As I said before, there is no reason why the world should prefer humans over machines or machines over human, if not taken into consideration quality, right? So the big issue is there. Can a machine provide the same quality as a human interpreter? Would you entrust your health or your personal freedom to a machine rather than a human interpreter? Who knows? Let me just say one thing, and that will be my last thing for tonight. I don't think that, at least at this stage, in the foreseeable future, I don't think machine interpreting can replace human interpreting. I don't think machine interpreting can be better than human interpreting. And do you know why? Because humans are imperfect. When we speak, we make mistakes, we have slips of the tongue, we are sometimes confused and confusing, we are sometimes vague, we forget things, we're not perfect in the way we express ourselves. And we are absolutely able to cope with this. Communication works in spite of all the difficulties, in spite of this imperfection, etc. Big question: can machines cope with human imperfection? I think imperfection is so human that only humans can cope with it. It is a little bit like, self-driving cars. So if there are only self-driving cars around, everything is perfect. Add to the equation the erratic behavior of human drivers, and then things are a little bit different, right? And the same is true here. I think, as I said, I think imperfection is so human that it takes a man or a woman to cope with imperfection. And that's why I think that, at least for the foreseeable future, human interpreting is going to prevail over machine interpreting. Or I really hope this is the case. I'll stop here and thank you very much. My final word is, as you can see, the title of this presentation is the challenge of, yes, multilingualism, language and languages are indeed a challenge, but and a challenge to be met by all of us. And I really hope we join forces and try and meet this challenge together, or with the same spirit in our different parts of the world and different walks of life. I'll stop here and thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I'm at your disposal for a few questions, if you so wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Viezzi, for this invaluable presentation. Now, if you have any questions, we have 15 minutes for questions. For attendance certificates, please make sure that you fill it now, no later. So, okay. Noura, are you there?
Okay. Yes, Mr. Amir, thank you, Prof. Viezzi, for your nice presentation. I just wanted to mention for audience that we have just put the form of participant, so please fill it.
Okay, and if you have any questions, please raise your hand so you to give you the permission to ask Professor Viezzi your question.
Yes, we have Mirwan.
Yeah, please make your questions specific and direct, please.
Okay. Yes. As we know, Professor is from Italia. Il professore Maurizio Viezzi, tutto l'amore e il rispetto professi concesso questo tempo. O processo Licandro il coni delle sfere, che dovremo affrontare le nostre lavori on fattori. The question is, come possiamo svilupparci in questo campo per le tre lingue, professori? And I told Mr. Viezzi in English that all the love and respect for giving us this precious time and clarifying some of the challenges that we'll face in our work or in the future and after graduate. The question is, how can we develop in this field? Because maybe I speak three languages and other. Thank you, Professor.
I'm not sure I have understood your question. You said you speak three languages, but I haven't understood the question.
The question is, how can I develop my language in this field if I go a translator after when I graduate?
How can you improve your languages? Is this what you said?
Yeah, bro.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't know anything about you. I don't know where you live. I don't know.
I am Mr. Marwan. I am from Amman Arab University.
Okay, but I don't know. I don't know you personally. I don't know where you're from. I don't know what your history is, etc., etc. So it is very difficult to give a personal answer to this question. I can only give a general answer to this question. There are several ways I can improve your language proficiency, your knowledge of language and knowledge of everything that surrounds language, culture, etc., etc. And the only way is to get in touch with the world where your language, the parts of the world where your languages are spoken. If your language languages are, I don't know, Arabic, English, and French, for example. Well, get in touch with the English-speaking world, with the French-speaking world. The things are much easier now than 20, 30, or 40 years ago. When I was a student, it was so difficult to even to get a foreign newspaper. I remember going to the railway station, which was not around the corner, hoping to find a copy of The Economist once a week. That was the magazine we were all reading avidly, you know, for the quality of the English language, for the information about world affairs, etc. Now it is so easy. You just switch on your computer and you have all the world speaking to you in all languages, in all accents, etc., etc. Just use and exploit that opportunity, seize that opportunity, which is absolutely fantastic, and do it regularly. I say to my students, you should read one newspaper every day in the different languages in your language combination. From page 1 to page 64, I don't know, whatever, and read it. Read the newspaper, read books, and listen to people talking. Listen to the news in the different languages. This is the only way to improve, because you will never end learning a language. Every day you learn. Every day you have the opportunity to learn new things. Just think of this COVID situation. Just think of how many new words have emerged over the past few months in the different countries to refer to, I don't know, social distancing, lockdown, new words, okay, that emerge. How can you? Those are words that you can't find in any dictionary. And if you want to know how social distancing, how they say social distancing in your seat language, you don't have any dictionary. You have to read the newspapers in that language, to watch the news in that language, etc., etc. This is the only thing you have to do. And then, of course, practice your interpreting or translation skills and techniques.
Sì, prof. Viezzi. Grazie, prof.
You're welcome.
I'd like to ask a question.
Please.
Yes, Professor Viezzi, thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. It was extremely interesting. But I'd like to ask about the main idea, the focal point. Do you mean by multilingualism facing a challenge today because of English as a lingua franca, more so than Latin as a lingua franca, for example, because of the technological developments and the dominance of English all over the world?
Well, as I said, multilingualism is different things, right? And multilingualism is you and me talking in English now. For example, we are multilingual because we are able to use more than one language. Multilingualism, and this may be a challenge if you want to, if you want the population of your country to be multilingual, you have to have appropriate language policies, you have to invest in that, etc., etc. So it is a challenge. You have a multilingualism of institutions, as I said, institutional multilingualism. To guarantee that kind of multilingualism, you have to train translators and interpreters. Okay, and this is a challenge. They have to be good enough to ensure multilingualism in institutions. The European Union, as I said, 24 languages, okay? Just imagine the amount of translation and interpreting going on there. In principle, there are 558 language combinations, okay, within the European institutions, in principle. So to guarantee that is not easy. It is a challenge. There is multilingualism of society, and there the big challenge is guaranteeing translation and interpreting for all those who need it to have access to services. And then there is multilingualism or the lack of multilingualism in scientific communication, academia, etc., etc. So different areas where multilingualism is or may be a challenge. Now, the difference between Latin and English, of course, the world in the 16th or 17th century was different, right? Now we really have a globalized world, global world, which was not the case, of course, in the 16th or 17th century, where the world was basically much smaller, okay, than is the case today in terms of communication, in terms of traveling, in terms of movement of knowledge, dissemination of ideas, etc., etc. I am rather worried of, as I said before, of the amount of the presence, the overwhelming presence of English is something that worries me, because I find it dangerous. In my ideal world, everything will be done in national languages, and everything will be translated and interpreted. Okay, this would be ideal, giving everybody the opportunity to use their own language to develop ideas, to write about their research, etc., etc., and then have those things translated or interpreted into other languages. That would be absolutely perfect. That would give everyone the ability to use their own creativity, and it would be much, much better, I think, for research, for knowledge, for the production and dissemination of knowledge. I'm talking about research, I'm talking about production of knowledge, etc., which is something different from the use of English as a lingua franca, which is what you do when you are in an airport abroad, when you are in a hotel abroad, etc., etc. There are two things completely different. Those two things are completely different. But in terms of knowledge production and dissemination of knowledge, the use of one language alone is, to my mind, a danger, and it is something that is impoverishing the knowledge at world level. Yeah.
Yes, and there's no value for diversity anymore.
Well, there is a tendency towards homogenization, which is exactly the contrary of diversity, right? and this is, I don't like it. I'm sorry, but I don't like it. I like the world because the world is diverse, not because the world is all the same. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, we have Haneen. Haneen, you can.
Professor Viezzi, you see, I'm right now on my second year of the university. I'm supposed to be an interpreter, and I'm very proud of that. But I constantly hear that the prophecy of the interpreter is to be dead by the year I graduate from the university. And now, thanks to your wonderful lecture, I have some more statements against that. But I wanted to ask you if you ever got to hear the same thing while you were studying in your young years.
Say it again. Just the final things.
Did you ever hear that your prophecy is to be dead by the year you graduate from the university? Like, did they say that the interpreting is dying when you were studying at the university?
Well, I studied at university 200 years ago. I mean, as you can probably see by white hairs covering my face. No. People were not talking about a dying profession at that time. So the world of translation and interpreting looked promising and full of potential professional satisfaction, etc., etc. But anyway, as I showed during my talk, the market is expanding. There is an increase in the amount of translation and in the amount of interpreting being provided year after year, which is interesting. And in general, people say yes, that translation will disappear and interpreting will disappear. It is not true. They will not, and translators and interpreters will not disappear either. As I said, in the foreseeable future, there will still be translation and interpreting translators and interpreters. Of course, things may be different. I can tell you, as far as my country is concerned, there is many conferences, scientific conferences are held in English alone. Okay, so with no need for interpreting. This is the scientific conference. But bilateral communication between political authorities, bilateral communication between trade partners, etc., etc. All this is always done through interpreters. Not to mention what happens in courts, for example, court interpreting. Court interpreting is an area which is expanding, of course, because people move, people are on the move, and if people are on the move, this means that there is a greater demand for interpreting in particular contexts, for example, in court, and so on and so forth. Maybe the emphasis a little bit changed. Maybe interpreters are not so much needed in this particular area, but are more needed in another particular area. Perhaps the languages are a little bit different. Languages in demand are a little bit different. Perhaps other languages than was the case in the past should be learned and should be because they are required, but there will still be need and work for interpreters, as I said, in the foreseeable future. There is no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Not to mention the large international organizations, okay? They will never give up their multilingual structure. People think of the European Union. Every now and then people say, all those languages, why do you need all those languages? They cost so much, you have to. Well, they will never change. I mean, if you have had a right since the beginning of the institution, nobody will ask you to give up that particular right after 50 or 60 years, okay? If your language has been an official language since day one, it will remain so, because nobody will ever be able to deprive you of that right, okay? And then in terms of cost, people tend to think that translation and interpreting costs so much. No. Do you know the cost of multilingualism in the European institutions? Do you know the cost of having everything done through translation, interpreting, etc., etc.? Everything costs more or less €3 per year per citizen. Okay, so I spend every year, I spend 3 years to enable the European institutions to have 24 official languages. It is not much, is it? This is a good reason to be convinced that interpreting and translation will go on. They will not die. Don't worry, my dear. There will be translation and interpreting throughout your future career.
Excuse me, did you ask me a question?
Excuse me, Prof. Viezzi, we need to hear to Dr. Ayman to tell us more about the English conference. Go ahead, please, Dr. Ayman.
Okay, Ms. Noura. First of all, many thanks for the Arab Translator Association for giving us a good chance of enjoying this session. And thanks for Professor Viezzi for giving us this chance to enjoy this wonderful session about multilingualism, which is one of the most important topics related to the field of translation. And we take this opportunity to declare one of the coming events held by the organization of our organization, which is the first international conference on teaching English and translation in the 21st century, 16 January 2021. The title of the conference is about teaching English and translation in the 21st century. The main topics of the conference, the first topic is the teaching method in the 21st century. The second topic is issues and the challenges in teaching English in the Middle East. The third topic is teaching translation, literature, and culture in the 21st century. The fourth topic is the use of ITs and telecoms in teaching English curricula. And the last topic is teaching English in COVID-19 pandemic. This conference, I think this conference will be a good opportunity for all those who are concerned with teaching the English language to share ideas all over the world. And it's a good chance today to have speakers from different parts of the world to declare our conference. I hope all those who are concerned to participate in this event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman. We have Ali. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Ali Idrisi from Doha, Qatar. I would like to thank the organizers and also the speaker, Professor Viezzi, for the interesting talk. Very inspiring and of course dealing with the challenging issue of multilingualism. I just want to ask a question and then make a comment. So my first question has to do with your last point when you concluded about interpreting. And it was very interesting when you mentioned that machine translation has done a great job lately. And I'm sure machine translation has developed so much over the last few years. And I was wondering if you would predict the same success to machine interpreting in a few years from now. So that's the question, and the comment has to do. I just wanted to raise a point that was mentioned by a colleague last week on this platform. She works as an interpreter, I understood, in the United States, And of course, she does Arabic, but it seems that and this is another characteristic of the Arabic context, which is that of diglossia or multidilectilism. So if you talked about the issues or the challenges of multilingualism, I think there are also issues of multidilectilism, especially when it comes to the big Arab world. So what this colleague in the United States said is that whenever they needed an interpreter, for example, in court or in a hospital, they would also specify what dialect the interpreter spoke, because they have very specific needs. So I just wanted to mention that as another challenge. You know, it's maybe a subset of multilingualism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the comment and for the question. As for the comment, yes. Well, you know, language and dialects. I don't want to enter this discussion. I don't like the idea of language dialects as in first division or second division, etc., etc. If the ways of speaking are different enough, we may call it languages, we may call it dialects, but well, in actual fact, what we need is someone able to, understand and convey meanings, etc. It doesn't matter whether we call them languages or dialect. I take your point, and I don't know much about the Arab world, but all my experience in the Arab world and contacts with Arab colleagues in the Arab world told me very clearly that there are these differences in terms of dialects and different kinds of, Arabic spoken in different parts of the Arab world. I'm well familiar with all that. I understand your point. As for the question, well, you asking me to predict. As I said, also in answering the previous question, I'm sure that machine interpreting will not take over. I'm sure that interpreting is so complex that I really can't imagine a machine being able to do what humans do, what humans have great difficulties in doing, just because of the very complex nature of human language. And for the imperfection I mentioned before, you remember when I was answering a question before, I said that I went to university 200 years ago, right?
Yes.
I remember a few years ago we had a meeting in France, in Bordeaux, and we were going to the university. All colleagues participating in that meeting. We left the hotel. We went to university where we were having this meeting, and there were so many young people around, all dressed with white robes, and they were chanting. I can't remember what were. There was quite a lot of students around. Okay. Fine, all with white robes, etc. Okay, then when we arrived at the university, and before we began the meeting, we asked the local colleague. Listen, we said we saw so many students, etc. But what were they doing? I said, this is something they do. All students do. 100 years. This is what students do here in Bordeaux 100 years before the final exam. Could you please switch off your microphone? Otherwise it is very difficult. So I repeat, this is what the colleague said. This is something students do 100 years before the final exam, which is of course absurd, okay? It was a slip of the tongue, as it were. We were 10 people there listening to talking with this colleague, and out of 10 people, only 3 realized that she had said years. All the other 7 immediately translated that years into days. Okay, they didn't realize, or at some unconscious level, okay, they changed this absurd thing into the real thing. Okay, so my 200 years was a joke. Her 100 years was a slip of the tongue, etc. It was perfectly understood in the context of utterance, etc. What would a machine do? The machine would probably translate 100 years, right? The
Yes.
machine would not normalize this into days, etc. Okay, so this is the kind of imperfection, but there are many other examples that we can possibly think of imperfection in communication that we solve easily. I don't know, okay, I can't imagine a machine being as efficient as the human in solving all this. In particular, in sensitive settings, in particular in sensitive situations, can you imagine in court saying something like that? Okay, it could be, I don't know. My idea, I don't want to predict, but I say that I find it very, very difficult and very unlikely for machine interpreting to take over, to actually replace human interpreting in real professional things. I'm not talking about those silly machines. You know, you go to hotel reception and you use some kind of interpreting machine for I don't know, asking whether there are 2 available rooms. That's something else. But if you think of hospitals, if you think of courts, there things are a little bit more delicate and more complex.
You need human beings.
I think so. I think so.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now let's listen to Salma. Go ahead, Salma, please.
Okay, first of all, thanks for your efforts, and I want to know the job of a translator required in today's job market, especially in European countries. I mean, translation from English into Arabic and vice versa. And what kind of a translation is most requested today? And the last, how do I started working as a translator after graduation?
Well, what kind of translation? Arabic, English? My answer is I don't know. Very simply, I don't know. It depends on. 10 years ago, no, 20 years ago, I would have said it depends on where you live. Now, space has become immaterial. I mean, you can do your translation. You can live in, I don't know where you live, but you can live in the Middle East and work for an Australian company who is providing services to a Japanese company, etc., etc. All this is today's reality. I don't know exactly the areas of the sectors where there is a greater demand for translation in that language combination. Really, sincerely, I don't know. What do you do? Well, I think the typical process is the moment you graduate, you simply you simply tell the world that you do exist, that you have finished your studies, that you have acquired certain skills, and that you are ready to work. At the beginning, it will not be easy, and then slowly you will start working with clients, agencies, etc., etc. Things have not changed from this point of view. The moment you enter the market, you have simply to let people know that you are there and that you can do things such as, okay, translating this from language X into language Y. Something interesting could be to specialize and to find areas of specialization. This is always very, very, can be very profitable. If you are an expert in a particular field, this is always very, 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 very useful. And but I can't help you more than more than that.
Okay, Noura, let this I think Russian lady ask her question. She's raising up her hand.
Yes, please go ahead.
Is that Russian name, Russian lady? Okay, go ahead, my friend.
Hello.
I'm sorry. Hello. I wanted to ask you a question. First of all, thank you for your great presentation. And you said that 15 years teenagers have bad with expressing their emotions. Why do you think this happened? And what advice can you give to teenagers to help them with expressing their emotions?
No. Probably I have not been clear enough. I was not talking about emotions. I was referring to a study published by a high-level group set up by the European Commission in 2012. And excuse me, voila. This was a high-level group set up by the European Commission. They worked for a couple of years and they produced a final report where they say that 20% of 15-year-olds are functionally illiterate, which means that, as I said, technically they can write and they can read, but when they read, they don't understand what they read, and when they write, they can't write. I mean, they can't put content in what they write. They can't express themselves. But I was not referring to emotions. I was referring to just any kind of content you may imagine. They simply can't write, okay, and they simply can't read. They can't read a book. They can't write even a simple text. Okay, this is what I was saying. I was simply mentioning and quoting that report. Okay, and the problem is a problem of language use. It is not a problem of psychological difficulties or diseases, etc. It is language use, and they are not able to use the languages properly. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
One more.
Do you have time to take another question or?
Yes. May I ask a question?
Well, it is what 10 minutes to 9 for me. Perhaps we can go till 10 more minutes if you so wish.
Okay.
One question. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it was very nice presentation. I'm not a linguist myself. I'm an economist, but since I'm interested in these topics, I want to ask. So the question is regarding this Franco-lingua, and in this regards, you remember that society was trying to create like Esperanto, which will be the language, but it not worked out. So don't you think that the idea of the Franco-lingua is to have a simple communication language, which is English nowadays. And maybe this is in correlation what you said, that English is like a simple language or not good, what you mentioned. That's first question. And secondly, whatever the trend is nowadays in the world regarding the different forces and countries and etc., don't you think that it's finally a fight among the languages in the world? Thank you.
I'm not sure I have understood your second question. Could you repeat that?
Well, I'm saying that if we look in the world map, we see different large countries, big countries, empires, economies. What is beyond them? Beyond them is the language, no? So if it is the language, maybe that's the reason of these differences and the different mentalities and different cultures.
Okay. This is a very difficult question, and we don't have much time, but I will try to give you some kind of answer. Yes, English as a lingua franca and lingua franca in general. Now, it is lingua francas are very useful. It is very nice that today we are here to 100 people talking and speaking and listening and using one language. Okay, this is good. This is very, very good. Okay, we like it very much. It is very useful being able to use English, for example. This is the language of this period in history. It is very useful to go to Moscow, okay, and speak English in the hotel. It is very good to go to Beijing in China and be able to speak English at the airport, and you'll find people who understand you. Okay, this is the kind of global lingua franca that is absolutely useful, extraordinarily useful. Okay, you know some English in the restaurant professions, in the hotel professions, almost everywhere you find someone speaking English, and it is very good. You can order your dinner, you can find a room, etc., etc. But if we move this to another level, not very simple communication, I need a room, I need some pasta, I need a beer, I need a cup of tea, etc. If we move this to another level, to the level of the production of knowledge and dissemination of knowledge, research, etc., there you realize that the role of language is so important that you would need your own language to be creative, to be effective, to be efficient, etc., etc. Okay, using a foreign language is a limitation. Okay, does not allow you to fully use your potential capacity, your creativity, etc., etc. This is the point. Okay, if I want to ask you simply whether you have a room available in your hotel, it is very easy. We don't need anything particularly sophisticated. But if we are producing ideas, okay, about this or that, the economy or science or whatever, well, there the use of language is absolutely important, because, as I said before, quoting people who deal or have dealt with this topic, language is not just a communication tool. Language is also the tool with which we produce idea, is the tool with which we produce knowledge, okay? And there, resorting to a lingua franca, that is a foreign language, entails, brings about limits to what one can do, Okay, this is my opinion about lingua franca. As regards the other point, very complex question, countries, languages, empires, cultures and languages, etc. Yes, of course, there are differences between people, between peoples, between countries, etc., etc. What is the role of language in all that? I frankly don't know. I don't think that there are languages that are better than others. I don't. Clearly, languages express and ways of thinking, traditional ways of thinking, etc. But I don't think languages have a big role in creating differences between people. I don't think that the Chinese are what they are because they speak Chinese. I don't think that Americans are what they are because they speak English. But anyway, it would be interesting to understand and verify whether there is a close relation between languages and policies, languages and attitudes, languages and mentality. I don't know. If you think of the English-speaking world, you have enormous differences. Okay, right? You have the United States, but you also have New Zealand, which is, I think, the most peaceful country in the world. So I don't know. You have Australia and you have the UK. Again, different people, different attitudes. I don't know, but it is an interesting question. But I'm sorry, but I'm not able to give you an answer without thinking about that for 2 weeks. So ask me again in 2 weeks, perhaps I can give you a serious answer. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's, okay, Mr. Eliezer. Hello, Mr. Eliezer.
Yes, here I am. And first of all, shukran kthir to the author. And tante grazie, Professor Viezzi, for your enlightening presentation. I humbly beg to differ on some points. One of them is when what you said about internationalization and globalization. They are indeed intertwined, and you cannot expect internationalization in an underexposed economy or polity. I mean, underexposed to streams of globalization and contact with other places. And another point is what you said about machine translation. Even there, you have two things that will, I don't know if limit or boost machine translation and machine interpretation. One is from a linguistic point of view, that some languages are indeed much easier to convert into artificial intelligence. And another one is that some, because of their being central or more prone from a political and economical point of view to be lingua franca, will be much more researched than other languages. And that's it. And again, thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, as I said, I don't know much about machine translation, but what you say is certainly true. There are languages that are more studied than others. There are languages that for which there is much more research, etc., etc. Well, this is absolutely clear. You are right. I don't know if some languages are easier than other for artificial intelligence. I really don't know.
No, I can tell you, for instance, take Arabic or Hebrew, that the lack of vowels when you write them make them easier to be read in different ways.
Mhm.
That
So there is some ambiguity. There is some ambiguity in the language itself. Is it
exactly?
Is it the case? Huh? Yeah.
Which-
Okay. But yes, certainly. This is. I remember reading years ago that even though simple machine translators you could find in your computer 2 years ago, a few years ago, they were sometimes acceptable for certain languages. They were always awful for other languages, simply because there was no enough research and comparison between within language pairs, etc., etc. As for the other question, internationalization and globalization, I don't know if I was clear in what I said. I find, to my mind, the difference between the two is that globalization is an attempt to cancel differences between countries and try and arrive at a sort of homogenized world where people do the same things everywhere, where you find McDonald's restaurants everywhere, where you listen to the same music when you are in airports in Singapore or in New York or in Paris. You have the same shops, you have the same music, you have the same food, etc., etc. This is sort of globalized world, okay, where everything is the same everywhere and where English is the language of the thing. Whereas for me, internationalization is something where languages and cultures coexist and feed each other and enrich each other, etc., etc. There is no attempt at canceling things, but there is an attempt at using things and using all languages and all cultures. They all have a role to play. They are all respected and used, etc., etc. This is my idea of internationalization, and the two are to some extent conflicting, right? You can't have the one if you have the other, and vice versa. I don't know. It is my idea. It is my opinion. It is as simple as that. And of course, as it is an opinion, you may agree or disagree, and I'm absolutely. You are entitled to your own opinion, just as I am entitled to mine, and no bigger thing here. Okay.
Of course. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I think it is for me. It is 9:02, so perhaps we could stop here and perhaps find another opportunity for another meeting sometime in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Viezzi. We are very glad to have this informative lecture by an exceptional, prominent figure, Professor Viezzi. We are glad to see to have our guests from different parts of the world. Hope to see you again. Next week we are celebrating the completion of a translation course started 2 months ago, presented by 7 lecturers and translators. It was a free course. More than 100 participants has participated in this course. Hope to see you again. Do you have any final saying, Noura?
Thank you, Prof. Viezzi.
Thank you all, and we are glad and proud to see you, and hope to see you in our coming events. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a great pleasure to be with you, and I hope we will meet again sooner rather than later. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. We are very proud of you, Professor Viezzi. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. It was very informative and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.